right, if you have your Bibles, if you want to go to Joshua chapter 3, Joshua 3. And that's where we will continue today. As we continue looking at the Jordan River rules, lessons that God can teach us as we go through life here. Rule number 7, where we are today, trust God to turn problems into pathways. All of us, no matter how good or not quite so good life is, all of us will encounter problems. The question is, how do we react when we face those problems? We have a God that can help give us a way through those. He doesn't always allow us to go around them and avoid them. Sometimes we have to go right through them. But he can turn those problems into pathways. We'll look at our passage here in just a moment. Let's run quickly through the previous 6 rules that we've seen here. First of all, realize that God means for you to move forward. Our goal in life is not to maintain the status quo. It is to be progressing, to be improving, to be moving on, moving forward. Say no to discouragement. When we face a problem, it is not uncommon to become crestfallen, discouraged. This isn't what I expected. This isn't what I was hoping for. Say no to discouragement. Say yes to strength. Understand that God gives us the ability to go through that problem. He gives us the strength that we need. If we wanted to go to the life of Paul, Paul had a problem. Paul went to God and said, God, would you take away this problem? And God said, nope, my grace is sufficient for you. The strength wasn't so much muscular strength. It was spiritual strength. God's grace makes it able for us to go through these problems. Next we saw then step up to the moment. Don't shy away from it. Don't try to avoid it. Understand that there's something taking place here, and if we've encountered it, God expects us to deal with it, to move on, to move forward, step up to the moment. And we talked about helping someone along the way. The lessons that we learn in life don't do nearly as much good when we hold them to ourselves as they do when we share them with those around us. They say that experience is the best teacher. And I've often said, yeah, your experience is my best teacher. If you do something dumb and get swatted for it, guess what? I don't want to do the same thing. I want to learn from. I'll give you an example. Saw the example on the way in this morning. Lights were not flashing, but as you're coming down 15, on the northbound side is Mr. Police Officer. Cars come over the hill. As I look in my mirror, they come over the hill. Hey, brake lights on every one of them as they come by. Now, they may have been doing 54 3/4 miles per hour. Your tendency is to do what? Tap the brakes. Because they have learned from the past that guy has no problem turning on his lights. They've learned experience. Maybe not their experience, but they've seen somebody else and they don't want to be next in line. Find somebody to help. As I learn lessons, share what I learn. Next we see, expect God to guide you where you've never been before. Life takes us to interesting places, doesn't it? There are times that, again, we said earlier, this isn't what I expected, which means you may not have encountered this before. This may not be what you were expecting. And yet God is there to guide us along. He doesn't throw us into the middle of a mess and say, let's see how you do. Let's see if you can figure this out. But he's right there with us to guide us and to direct us. And so there's a couple of parts to that. First of all, expect God to guide, and then expect to be where you've never been before. And yet understand that God is still guiding. God did not get lost. And then last week, we saw prepare today for tomorrow's wonders. Yeah, we can only live our life one day at a time, but what I do today helps set the stage for tomorrow. As I learn, understand, as I obey what God has told me, that gives me the greater ability, better ability to deal with what I face tomorrow. So prepare Prepare today for tomorrow's wonders. And then today, trust God to turn problems into pathways. Problems into pathways. And so our first point is on Jordan's stormy banks. They are there at the edge of the river. Now, understand, they are not all on the edge of the river. This was a big herd of people. A large group. They were not all standing there with their big toe right over the water. But they were all there at the edge of the river. Take your Bible, go to Psalm 66. Keep your place. Obviously, we haven't read yet. Keep your place here. But I want to look at this Psalm 66 passage very, very quickly. Psalm 66 and verse 6. And this is actually somewhat of a recurring theme throughout the scriptures here. Psalm 66:6. He turned the sea into dry land. What's that looking back to? Looking back to the crossing of the Red Sea. This is something that we'll see it elsewhere. Even today, we'll look at a couple of other passages. We'll see this. This is something that is rehearsed in the ears of the children of Israel for generations. What God did back then. He turned the sea into dry land, and they went through the flood on foot. There did we rejoice in him. Okay, that's something that they have heard. They have had repeated in their minds, in their ears. They've had taught to them. And it's going to be coming up again. All right, let's go back to Joshua. Let's go ahead and read today's passage then. Joshua 3, 9 through 17. And Joshua said unto the children of Israel, come hither and hear the words of the Lord your God. Now, understand what he's saying here. And again, this is a large group of people. And he does not have a public address system. Okay? And so he has to trust others as he gives this message. In my mind, think of the commotion. Because in order for the people in the back to hear, and the people in the back may be way far back. All right? University of Michigan Stadium, their football stadium, holds 101,000 plus change. Okay? Large. So you stand at the 50-yard line, dead middle of the field, and you talk. Is everybody in there going to hear you? No. In fact, our tendency as people is, that guy down there may be talking, but I have something I need to tell my neighbor. And so, even as he's talking, so is somebody. Think of the background noise that you're dealing with. So as he's saying, hey, come hither and hear what God, he has to rely on others to communicate the message throughout the crowd. There's a lot happening here. Come hither and hear the words of the Lord your God. That last statement there is interesting. Because when we get to the end of his life, I mean, we're familiar with Joshua in chapter 22. Hey, but as for me and my house. But look at the context. He also tells them that you're not going to follow after God. And they say, oh, yes, we will. And he says, oh, no, you won't. And yet here, okay, come and listen to what the Lord your God has to say. Because this is a very important message. And Joshua said, hereby ye shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail. Okay, this is important. It's one introductory statement before he gets to the main point of his message. But look how he words this. Coming to the people. He will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Jebusites. He's going to drive all these people out. Now, if you know your Old Testament history, did all those people get exterminated from the land of Israel? It wasn't God's fault. He will without fail drive them out. You will without fail let them stay. I mean, that's kind of what's happening here. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth passeth over before you into Jordan. Now therefore take you 12 men out of the tribes of Israel, out of every tribe a man, and it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests that bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of Jordan, that the waters of Jordan shall be cut off from the waters that come down from above, and they shall stand upon an heap. We'll come back and see that. And it came to pass, when the people removed from their tents to pass over Jordan, and the priest bearing the ark of the covenant before the people, and as they that bear the ark were come in unto Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped into the brim of the water, for the Jordan overfloweth all his banks at all the time of harvest, that the waters which came down from above stood and rose up upon an heap very far from the city Adam, that is by Zaratan, and those that came down toward the sea of the plain, even the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people passed over right against Jericho. And the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of Jordan. And all the Israelites passed over on dry ground until all the people were passed clean over Jordan. There is a lot of really interesting information within those verses that we could stop and go verse by verse and say, notice this, notice this. This is really interesting. Notice this. There's a lot here. My encouragement to you, sometime this week, take these verses and a pen and a piece of paper and jot down some of those things and just think on them, meditate on them. What Joshua's telling the people of Israel. Because it's really fascinating. Even as he's talking about God, the Lord your God, the Lord of all the earth. I mean, there's a lot tucked in here. So we've already looked at Psalm 66. As the Jews faced the river, perhaps they were recalling, again, we've seen, it was rehearsed in their ears. Perhaps they recalled the stories told by their parents. Perhaps they remembered their mom and dad. Now, also think, the children of Israel had been to Kadesh Barnea. They had sent in spies. The spies came back. 10 of the spies gave a bad report. The people said, we're not going in there. We can't do this. God said, okay, all of the adults are going to die. There were some of the children that maybe had gone through the Red Sea. Not everybody who passed through the Red Sea died. Joshua and Caleb, for example. But maybe some of the young'uns, maybe they were now 55, and they remembered. Maybe they hadn't thought about it for a while, and now they're at the banks of this river, and they say, you know what? I think I've seen this before. Maybe they were younger, but they remembered the stories that they had been told. Many of these people, they had not been there to see the plagues in Egypt, as Moses had his contest with Pharaoh and the magicians. Many of them had not seen the Red Sea. They had been born in the intervening years. Many of them had not experienced Sinai as God sent down the law. But maybe they'd heard the stories. There were some here who had experienced those things, but a great many who had not. Perhaps they had no inclination what was about to take place, or maybe they had a clue. And then Joshua comes to them and says, we need the priests. We need one from each tribe. And when the priests step into the water, they're going to step into the water and step on dry ground. Maybe they had a clue what was about to take place. Regardless, they had one job, and that job was obedience. They had to do what they were told. If they stood on the banks, okay, as soon as that water starts to move, I'm going to step in. Guess what wasn't going to happen? They had to obey, and that first step of obedience was that first step. If they don't step to the water's not going to move. And so just as they had to, we have to. We know that we can always trust God. God told them what was going to happen. They had to trust that that is exactly what was going to happen. Now, I have pictures. You can kind of see it shaded through there a little bit. The end of the slides, I've got the final slide has a picture. The river today versus the river yesterday, the river's changed. Rivers do that, you know. The river's changed. It's not as big as it once was because of all the irrigation and things like that. The water from upstream is diverted into the fields and stuff. And so by the time it gets down here, it's not a narrow little creek, but it's not a big overflowing river like it was. If you remember when we went into this, okay, this isn't necessarily like, now, the Mississippi is not big and wide in every place, but this isn't necessarily like the Mississippi. But it was still a significant deterrent. If it were shallow and slow flowing, why do we have to part the water? So obviously this was a problem that they needed to address. And we have here that the Jordan today is but a shadow of itself from hundreds of years ago. Again, all the farmers and things, they diverted a lot of the water. Which means that we need to understand that observation is only as good as the knowledge that goes with it. Sometimes we want to look and see, I can see what's taking place. Yes, but that doesn't mean I know what was happening. We see that example in the field of science. Science wants to look out and say, well, this is what's always happened. I can't see what always happened. And the fact that this is what's happening today doesn't tell me it's what happened yesterday. And so observation is good, but observation has to be tempered by knowledge, because what I see doesn't tell me what I would have seen had I been there. Because not everything is as it was. And not everything is as it shall be. And so we just need to keep that in mind, because circumstances may change. But regardless of those circumstances, I still need to have faith. Regardless of what I'm facing, regardless of what I'm going through, I need to trust God. Now, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. But when I go through life, my life isn't the same yesterday and today. I track, Becky will tell you this, I track my hours at work. I've been doing it since I started there. I can go, I've got a box downstairs, I can go back and pull out a piece of paper and tell you what time I clocked in and what time I clocked out on any day that I've worked in the last 7 years, 8 years. In fact, I've got a guy that I typically walk in and out of work with, and he likes me to go first because he might gain an extra minute while I'm writing down my time. But, I can tell you exactly. You think a Monday's a Monday. My Mondays are never the same. No two days are the same, and no 2 Mondays are the same. Tonight, Sunday night, I'll clock in. I will clock in at the same time I always do. I mentioned this to you last week or the week before. I will clock in between 9:14 and 9:16. Almost always 9:15, but depending on traffic, may vary a minute either way. What time I clock out? My answer when she asks, don't have any idea. I may clock out at 3:30, I may clock out at 5:15, somewhere in there. Couldn't tell you. Because my life is not the same one day from the other. And even though we get in these, and I've mentioned before, I'm a man of routine. There's only so much of that routine that I can control. And your life may seem monotonous. Every day is the same. You know what? If you start to pencil out what you're doing, it's not. Things change. Stop and think how different life is now from where it was 10 years ago. Okay, understand, I need to have faith. I need to trust God, because I don't know what's going to happen in 10 hours. I don't know what's going to happen in 1 hour. In fact, to be perfectly honest, I don't know what's going to happen in 10 minutes. I may have a pretty good idea, but I don't know that. I have no control over my time. I can learn from the past, but I can't rely on the past. Now, I can rely on God. I can't rely on the past. Well, this is what I did yesterday, so? This is what I did last week, so? I have no guarantee over that. Now, the Jordan, yesterday, today. One more thing here that's kind of interesting. I'm not going to have time to go to it. This is maybe the first time that God divided the waters of the Jordan, but not the last time. He divided the waters for Elijah and for Elisha. After Elijah was carried up in a chariot of fire, Elisha has his mantle, and as he goes back to the Jordan, what does he say? Hey, I want the God of Elijah to be my God. Down goes the mantle, and walk across he goes. I mean, this is not the last time that these waters are divided. Probably the last time you have 1 million people going across, but not the last time these waters are divided. I don't know if it's in this hymnal, I didn't look, but by Oscar Eliason. Got any rivers you think are uncrossable? Any mountains you can't tunnel through? I mean, God specializes in doing what we can't. And taking the impossible and making it possible for us. We may face the uncrossable, but God can make a way. We may face the insurmountable problem, but it's not insurmountable to the Almighty. I mean, stop and think. Okay, this is not a trick question, okay? Very simple. What does Almighty mean? If he is the Almighty, then that means nobody else can compare to him because he is Almighty. Because God can turn our problems into pathways. We mentioned this last week. It'll show up again in today's notes. The plan wasn't for them to wade across the river. It tells us that here, as Joshua gives this, this final address, they're going to walk across on dry ground. But honestly, what if it had been the plan to wade across the river? Would God have been any less faithful? And so whatever God's plan is, we need to trust God's plan. God tells them, when you step in and the sole of your feet comes to the waters will be divided apart and will be up there in a great heap. Okay? What if the plan had been not for dry ground, but for shallow water, just a couple of inches deep? Not a big problem. Would God have been any less God? The goal was to get them across the river. God was showing them as they go across, I am the Almighty One, and I am in control of everything. Let's look at the next main point here. What if the river doesn't part? No, there's an interesting one. We talk about faith, and they're told, when the sole of your feet steps into the waters will divide. They are trusting that that water will divide. What if it doesn't? Now, again, that's a hypothetical because the Bible tells us very clearly the water's parted. There's a quote here from John Ross McDuff. Many pilgrims passing through the Red Sea and Jordans of affliction will be enabled in the retrospect of eternity to say, so as they're in eternity, they can look back and say, we went through the flood on foot, there did we rejoice in him. As I look back on my life, I can see where God has worked and how he has worked. I don't always see it in the midst of the trial, in the midst of the trouble. They were told to step into the river and then the waters would part. And that's interesting to me. At the Red Sea, God parted the waters, they went across. At the Jordan River, God tells them, you start to go across and then I'll part the waters. Now, you're standing here and you're told to step in. How long does a step take? God separates this water, divides this water fast. It's not as if they're standing there waiting for the waters to move, right? God tells them, you step, I'll divide the waters. It took faith for that first step. Now, I was not there. And if I had been there, I probably would have been toward the back of the crowd. I wasn't one of the priests. So the priest with the ark, okay, they're to go first. Everybody in the group has faith, but who had to step up by faith in the most literal way? Those guys at the front of the line. They had to trust God. And that first, That first step is always the most difficult. Always. And yet we can trust God even in that first step. God told them the waters would divide. God made a way. But, again, what was our main point here? What if the river didn't part? What if? We don't have to worry about what if. God showed himself to be God. Then another quote from John Ross Macduff. Trust God where you cannot see him. Do not try to penetrate the cloud he brings over you. Rather, look to the bow that is on it. The mystery is God's, the promise is yours. God told them, I will divide the water. And they could, without any doubt or hesitation, they could trust him for that. How he would do that, that's up to him. How he would accomplish this, a problem, but that was his problem. My problem? Obey. Trust him. Take that first step. Well, understand here, just because we do not see him doesn't mean that he's not here. A book, I'm not working through it quickly, partly because it makes my head hurt, but is it Francis Schaeffer? God is here and he is not silent. Oh, my word. Get a philosopher and have him start writing about theology, and it's like read a page and a half and I got to take a break. But he is here. And the fact that I don't see him or don't hear him doesn't mean that he is not here. They had to trust God. And they couldn't see him any more than we can. They had to trust that what he said he would do. Trust him. Trust him when it's easy, and trust him when it's not. Sometimes, well, we can see how all this is going to work out. Sometimes we can't. I need to trust him all the time. They understand that God has made a way. God tells them, I will divide the waters and you'll walk across on dry ground. He even told them where he was going to divide the water, which is interesting. That was information they didn't necessarily need, but it gave them some reassurance. Again, we already mentioned, the plan wasn't for them to wade across. God says, I'm going to divide the waters. I'm going to divide the waters from way up there, make a big heap, and you're going to go across on dry ground. Now, if this is a flowing river, and it says that it overflows its banks at this time of the year at the harvest, how much water did he hold back? And how long does it take for this large group of people to go across? I don't necessarily mind crowds. My biggest frustration with crowds is I typically walk with the purpose to get somewhere. I am not real good at meandering. I am not a good saunterer, okay? Typically, if I want to go somewhere, you better get ready to stretch your legs because there's somewhere to be. When you're in crowds, you can only walk as fast as the person in front of you, which means crowds generally go like this. Becky, there are times we do all of our grocery shop and everything takes place on Saturdays. Okay, she's off, I'm off, so that's just when we do all of our running around. There are times in, say, the holiday season when the stores are really busy. My knees ache because I'm not real good at this, and it hurts. When you've got a crowd this size, guess how they were going across? And all that time, that water that's supposed to be flowing down here is stopped way up the river. This is a massive, the Bible word here, heap. This is a massive amount of water. Look in verse 16. The waters which came down from above stood and rose up upon an heap. Basically, he made a mountain of water. He stopped the water from coming down through this one section so they could go across on dry ground. Well, how did that happen? Because God is almighty. What was that we saw here? The Lord of all the earth. The same God who was in the boat, who said, "Peace, be still," said, "Waters, you stop up there, please." And the waters did exactly what. And just as the disciples marveled that he could calm the winds and the waves, the children of Israel saw him do the exact same thing. Demonstrate control over the natural elements. He is God. Go to Isaiah 43. Isaiah 43, quickly. Let's see here. Isaiah. And verses 1 and 2. But now, thus saith the Lord that created thee, O Jacob, and he that formed thee, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by thy name, thou art mine. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, and neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. Don't know if, as Isaiah is recording this, he's thinking of Red Sea and Jordan River, but he very well could be. As God says, I have control over everything you're going to face. Over the seas, over the rivers, over the fires. Now, this is Isaiah writing this. Think coming up down the road a number of years. Maybe Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are thinking of fires as they get tossed into one. And God demonstrates, well, what did it say? When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned. 2 verses tucked in the latter half of Isaiah, but show us once again that God is God, and he's God over everything. We don't have time to go to it, but the song, How Firm a Foundation. As you go through, as you sing the song, as you look at the words, we've got this great foundation. It talks about through fiery trials. It talks about the fact that, you know what, I go through difficulties, challenges. I go through problems. And through all of this, I've got a firm foundation. He is still God. I can always know, without any shadow of a doubt, that God knows what he's doing. The scientific process. We talked about science earlier. The scientific process. As you go through and you are trying to let's say it's science fair time. In the science fair, you have to pick a topic, and then you have to do some study, and then you've got to do experiments. And the whole idea of an experiment, if it is successful, is that it can be replicated. That is, that you can do it again and again and again and get the same results. God knows what he's doing. It wasn't a case of God saying, well, let me try this and see how it works out. No, that's the junior high kid doing a science project. And then he says, well, that didn't work out the way it was supposed to. Mom, do you have some rags? It didn't work. Okay, that's not God. God knew exactly what he was doing. That was not trial and error. Hebrews 13:5. God says, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. Again, that is another of those recurring thoughts. In Matthew 28, it was, lo, I will be with you all the way, even at the end. Okay, that idea that God says, I'm not going anywhere. I will be there. Well, conclusion. First of all, our problems are for a reason. The things that we encounter in life that we think are a trouble, a problem, a difficulty, a challenge. Use whatever word you want. An opportunity. Our problems are for a reason. The things that I encounter are there because God has allowed me to encounter them. And if God allowed me to encounter them, then God has a plan. And God has a purpose for our problems. My job in life is to figure out what is God's purpose. What is God trying to teach me or show me? What is God trying to demonstrate? God has a purpose for our problems. Think back, this goes back to the children of Israel come to the Jordan. Did they remember, did they remember the stories that their parents had told them of the Red Sea? Stories of the past are not just stories. It's one of the challenges that we face as adults, as we're trying to communicate to the younger generation about our God. We need to teach the younger generation. Not just tell them, teach them. We want them to learn that they can trust God. And if we don't explain to them, if we don't show them, if we don't teach them that God can be trusted, how are they going to figure it out? Maybe that's why Christianity is suffering in the United States. Because we are so enamored with stuff and not with God, and we don't communicate to them what God is doing in our lives and the lives of those around us. And the stories they hear are just stories. Back when I was teaching English, we had reading assignments. And, say, okay, you need to pick X number of books to read. When we do book reports, you've got historical fiction, yada, yada, yada. One of them, category that I always had was biography. But then there was another category closely related to that, missionary biography. Because the missionary biographies are often written to show, hey, look what God did and how he accomplished this. Our young people, and not quite so young people, need to know and understand that they can trust the God that their forefathers trusted. And that the God who worked in years past is still at work today. He's just waiting for people to obey and take that first step. We need to teach the younger generation, take advantage of the opportunity that we have. We need to obey regardless. They're on the shore, on the bank of the river. And God says, when the sole of your feet comes to that water, I'm going to part the waters. All right, God, you start moving that water and I'll take that first step. And God says, no, that's not what I said. I said, you step in and you'll actually be stepping on. Change of preposition, huge difference in meaning. God says, you step into the water and there's not going to be the water to step in. You're going to step on dry ground. I need to obey. But God, I've never seen this happen before. I've heard about it, but I've never seen it. And God says, you don't need to see it before. You're going to see it now. Because I am God. We need to trust him in every circumstance. Every one. Circumstances change. We saw that earlier. Circumstances are different one person to the next. Circumstances are different one day to the next. I need to trust him in every circumstance and trust him regardless. I can trust my God. We mentioned earlier, let me see, where was that here? It was back in Roman numeral 2, letter B, number 2. Yesterday is not the same as today, not the same as tomorrow, and I can learn from the past. Don't rely on the past, but I can learn from it. Back when I was in college, I don't even remember what the guy's name was. There was a guy that had a financial investing program on the radio, on AM radio. It was a while ago. I think his first name was Bruce, but I couldn't tell you for sure. Do you remember that guy? Okay. And they still have the disclaimer today that says past performance is no guarantee of future results. Okay. I remember it from the radio. But they'll tell you that whenever they're talking about investing, because they don't want you to put your money in and then sue them because it didn't work out the same way. So they give you this disclaimer. Well, you know what? we like to think that because of what happened yesterday, I can expect that same thing to happen today. It doesn't work that way. What I do know is that my God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. My circumstances are not. And the way God wants to work is not the same. I can trust him regardless of everything else that's changing. Now that said, how many of us go through life and there's a situation that comes up and I pray and God says, not this time. What I'm praying for doesn't work the way I was hoping it was going to work. Does that mean that God is not God? No. Something else we see as we go through this is that God doesn't do things halfway. God says, you're going to go across on dry ground. And they go across on dry ground. That first step until the last step, God, move the waters. Straight out of the way. Think back to creation, in the days of creation. And at the end of each day, what did they say? They being God. God, not he, God, they. Three persons within the Trinity. What did they say? And it was good. God doesn't do it halfway. God does to God's satisfaction. Let's look at two verses here. Go to Jeremiah 1:19. You may still have your Bible open to Isaiah, I don't know. Jeremiah 1:19. Talking about God, in this case specifically protecting Jeremiah, says, and they shall fight against thee, but shall not prevail against thee, for I am with thee, saith the Lord, to deliver thee. God says, I'm always present, and I will protect you regardless. And we run into difficulties in life, trouble, headaches, trials, tribulations. God says, I will protect. And back over toward the end of Isaiah 51. And this, again, hearkening back to the Red Sea. Art thou not, verse 10, art thou not it which hath dried the sea, the waters of the great deep, that hath made the depths of the sea a way for the ransom to pass over? Again, they will have this story of God's miraculous work rehearsed in their ears for generations. Understand that it's not just a story. This is a literal event that actually took place. And here we have God looking back at that. And the redeemed, they're singing, they're talking about, hey, aren't you the one that did this? We can trust you. He is indeed trustworthy. There's just a couple of hymns mentioned here. We have an anchor. We go through life, trials and tribulations, the term that we'll often use, the storms of life. We have an anchor so that we can weather those storms. Okay, we can trust him. Jesus paid it all. If you go through and read the words, it talks about, some of the things that we encounter, go through. You know what? God has taken care of it. He's made a way. The whole story of it is well with my soul. And it talks about the billows and the waves around me. And regardless of what I'm going through and the storms that I'm encountering and the troubles and trial, you know what? It is well with my soul. Why? Because God is still God. And then, be still my soul. And we talked about the fact, and just last week before, be still and know that I am God. We live, the hustle and bustle of today is incredible. The din, there's a word you don't use every day. We talked a little bit at the beginning and introduction about the background noise. Okay. The din. Where I work, it is slightly loud, like really loud. And I mentioned before, I've got people that will come up and they'll try to talk with their indoor voice. I'm like, you're wasting your time, buddy. I have no idea what you're saying. And then for the big pager system to call people from around the building, there's a speaker probably 30 feet from behind my computer. There'll be times I'll be calling on the phone to a different department to find out what they want, if they need me to cut a trailer or get it out, and then that thing cuts loose. I'm like, you know, wait, I cannot hear a word you're saying. They get done talking on the intercom, yelling on the intercom. They get done with the intercom, okay, now tell me what you were saying. The din in life is deafening. There are times we need to just take a step back, take a deep breath, and realize that in the midst of all the turmoil, He is still God. And the lesson for today, He will turn our problems into pathways. I may find myself facing a problem that I cannot figure out how to get around, and He says, you don't have to go around it. I'm going to make a way through it. And that's what our God does. He gives us the ability to go through the trials. Father, we ask that you would guide in all that we do, and God, that you would give us the wisdom and the discernment that we need to live the life that you've called us to. Help us to trust you. Help us to obey and to live by faith each and every day. Live in a way that brings honor and glory to you, that shows others that you're a God who can be trusted. And we ask this in your name, amen. Have a great day.